Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another ENO8 Answers. Today is going to be a really awesome episode. I'm joined with a friend of mine that I've known for several years, Brenda Stoner. She's been a really successful entrepreneur, building several software products, and has a lot of, I think, wisdom and good stories and information that we're looking forward to cover today. So, Brenda, thanks for agreeing to hop on. Really excited for our chat, and I'm really excited to talk through some of the things that you've learned and what we can share with the folks that are listening in.
Happy to be here.
I thought a good place to start would be just, let's talk a little bit generally about your journey as an entrepreneur and, specifically a software entrepreneur. And, let's just start with that. So can you tell us when did you sort of take the plunge?
Yeah, so I knew since I was a little kid that I wanted to have my own business. My father was kind of entrepreneurial, so I had the bug. But I knew that the only way to do that was to get some education first. And so, I grew up in small town Kansas, and I got an engineering degree at Kansas State.
Okay.
And I don't even know what an engineer does. That's how rural we were. So it was a pretty good scholarship, so I decided to go. I went and got an engineering degree. I got recruited by Texas Instruments. That's how I got to Dallas. And knowing that I did eventually want to have my own business, I just started learning everything I could. So working at the big company, I followed the finance people, I followed the software people, the chip people. How does HR work? And just tried to learn all the facets of the business while I sat there. It was a really good learning experience.
Yeah. And I guess that sort of broad view of the business probably served you pretty well, I would imagine, as you started your own company, right?
It did. And, I'll tell you, it was about 7 or 8 years that I made it at TI before I finally went crazy and that there was an event. So I was the number one marketer at TI for semiconductor. I went to my boss, and this was in 1994. And I said, hey, can I get a printer on my desk? Because I'm walking up and down the halls all the time. It was a paper world at that time. And he said, look, that would be a capital package, and we're just not going to do it. And I said, okay, I'm done here. And so I think it was probably just 2 weeks later that myself and another guy from TI picked up a technology that they had that they didn't want. We went to the CTO and said, hey, that was Palo Chatterjee at the time, and said, hey, can we take this technology? And he said, it needs to see the light of day. Go forth and do what you need to do. So we started in the back bedroom of Mark Horvath's house, and we started building software. And the thing we were building was some semiconductor design tools that were specific for something they call test chips. But it's circuits that help companies prove their technologies before they put them in practice.
Got it. Almost like a validation tool.
Huh?
I think when we were sort of doing like our pre-interview stuff together, I thought this one was interesting because the way you build software products has changed so much since you did that first venture, right? And so I think if we think about what has changed from then till now, what comes to mind? What was the process like then trying to build and launch a software product?
Well, I just said it was paper, but first websites were just being built in 1994. I built a website on CompuServe using Microsoft Front Page. Do you remember Front Page?
I remember it was part of Office back in the day, right?
Was dangerous with Front Page. And everybody had a desktop computer, and they were expensive. We were doing VLSI design on them, so they had to be fairly rugged. So they were about $10,000 a computer. So that was capital expense back in the day. So equipment was a barrier to entry for a lot of people.
Just to get started, just to have something to work with.
We had a development team in India, and we communicated over 9,600 baud. It was ridiculous. They would lose power at least 3 times a day. Yeah. And it was frustrating. We wrote our first set of tools in C++.
Okay.
And that's what everybody was writing in there. But I remember being super frustrated at the UI that we'd get. Back then it was all about Microsoft standards for UI. Like, where do your buttons go? How does the font look? How do you position these? And there were orphan buttons, and stuff was weird color. And then I finally went to India, and I went to visit our shop, and I see they're all sitting on x86 machines with 14-inch monochrome monitors.
Oh, wow.
And so
Wow.
I'm like, oh, okay, now I understand. You
Now it
don't
makes
have a
sense.
frame of reference for what we're talking about. So the big
Yeah.
lesson there was, don't assume stuff about
Yeah.
the development team or what people are going through. I mean, the power going out on a frequent basis is tough. It was hot in some of those buildings, so it was dusty. So we would have to clean the computers from time to time. It was kind of a hardship experience, but man, we got an awful lot done.
Yeah, I know that when I first started working with offshore teams, that was probably around 15 years ago. Even from now till then, it's changed a lot. Just being able to communicate is the reliability of internet is a really big difference because, like you said, like power would go out, but also the internet was really unstable.
Yeah,
It's like
if there was any.
you could, and there wasn't as much usage of tools like Zoom and Slack and a lot of the things that we sort of take for granted now. I think it's interesting. You were probably pretty early in the game of getting comfortable using an offshore team for that initial product. Can you talk a little bit about like how did you even get connected? Like how did you decide how to build that first version of the product? Did somebody on your team or did y'all have some relationships already or had worked with people offshore before?
So we had not. Well, no, we had within TI, and so this guy joined our group. He was the youngest PhD to come out of Caltech at that time, and he was a cousin of a guy at TI. And so we met and immediately fell in love with him. He's an awesome guy. He wanted to go back to India and give back to the community. So he went back and built a dev studio, and I mean the rest they say is history. But the guy was amazing to work with, and that is the secret still today. Right? I mean, all these things, all startups are just about people and who do you get on your team? How do you work with them? It's just about communications. And he happened to be very good at it. And we worked extra hard at it because we had to.
Yeah. Yeah, that is like a critical point of failure, right? If you don't have somebody who can run that operation that has that kind of experience, especially, if you're working with an offshore team, I find that having somebody there with the offshore team that's really reliable and kind of knows how to manage, that makes all the difference in the world of whether it works or whether it doesn't.
11 and a half hour time differences, which were weird.
Yeah, exactly. And in that first business, did you, if we go more broadly about the business, did you raise capital? Was that part of the process for you guys, or how did y'all approach the funding of what you guys were doing?
This one was easy. It was a service business, and so service businesses, you're kind of lucky that we hooked a contract with Semitech in our first month, believe it or not.
Oh wow, early.
And it was like a $60,000 contract. We had raised a little bit of angel money from our friends. I think it was $110,000 that we did in loans that we paid back in that first year and a half. So
got it.
If you're doing services like that and you can contract with people, you can fund all of your development, which is what we did.
Got it. So you got exposed to raising capital more in the loan method to start off with, and I know you've done a lot of that over the years. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but I think the other thing that's pretty interesting is how much just building software has changed in terms of the processes and methodologies that people use.
Oh, yeah.
Agile wasn't really that. I don't even know if that was a thing, at that time.
No, it was waterfall, and you built your roadmaps and you stuck to them, and you had hard releases, and people sweated bullets when it was release day.
Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, and especially the tools and testing and everything was way different back then. So you did that, and and then along the way you started another business after that. Was the next one pickup, or was there something else in between?
No, there was a medical device. There were some liquid nutritional supplements. There was a consulting company. There were about 4 or 5 other small ones in between there.
Yeah,
and actually the one that I was wrapping up, we had built transdermal patches with caffeine on them. It was a retail CPG. And I was going from technology to CPG, and I looked at my partners and I'm like, hey, it's retail. How hard can that be?
Yeah.
Which turned out to be super hard. And so we built these transdermal patches and put them in these 36-inch square boxes and had them. We were doing fulfillment from a warehouse downtown. And we got pretty far. We got in CVS, Walgreens, 7-Elevens. We were distributing that thing everywhere. But this was around 2014 2004, I think it was. And retail was just difficult at that time. And raising money to get sell-through. I mean, we got the product distributed. The challenge on CPG, which now I know a lot more than I used to, and learned a lot about CPG in the hindsight, but it takes money to create pull-through. And we didn't have any capital. And so we ended up closing that business down for want of money. And the warehouse manager called me one day and he said, "Hey, Brenda, you got all these boxes down here. I'm going to charge you for another month of rent unless you can get them up to you in Addison." I'm like, okay, well, how do you move a 36 by 36 by 36 square box across town the same day? And we started looking, FedEx and UPS consider that freight, and it's $600, comes on a skid, and it's maybe in 3 days. Post office won't touch it, won't get in their trucks. If you call a courier, and that's a pretty bad experience. If you've ever called a courier, I'm officing today with some legal people. They use couriers all the time, but that's a bad experience. And they only like to run legal documents around. They don't like big boxes.
Yeah, those are easy, right?
You didn't have a vehicle. I'm like, okay, well, how in the hell do you move these boxes across town same day? I'm like, I think this is an opportunity. And I'm driving up the tollway literally that day, and I look, and every fourth vehicle is a Ford F-150 pickup truck. And behind the wheel is a guy with strong forearms, Oakley sunglasses, right? He's a helpful neighbor guy. And I said, the hair went up on the back of my neck, and I'm like, okay, we're going to have to build this one because the Uber was brand new. I'm like, why can't we use that same technology to share an asset? And so that was in 2014. In 2015, I bought a pickup truck in December, and we started I bought it in 2014 in December, and we started making deliveries to see if people would pay us to move their stuff. And
interesting.
My boyfriend at the time, he and I, we would go move people's sofa, and they're like, wait, two college-educated people in a pickup truck just moved my stuff. And that was great. Yeah. I'm like, what's going on here? And so for the first 3 months, we knuckle dragged like crazy. And I had pockets full of cash because we were treating it as a cash business. But we didn't even think about stepping foot into technology development until we learned what the business looks like. And that's, I think, you had said one of the lessons you learn there is you've got to do some knuckle dragging before you ever commit to code. And I'm sure you could make a lot of lectures about that to people since you clean up a lot of that code.
We do, and I haven't heard this part of the story before, so I think that just to recap a couple of things you just said. So one is you were in the process of shutting down a business that wasn't working out. I've had that happen before. I know what that feels like, and there's a lot going on, I think, in your head when you're going through that. But what I've never heard you say that the idea for pickup came out of that process of shutting that down, which it's pretty interesting, and there's a good lesson there, right? I think. And the other thing that I heard you say that would be really important to highlight is that you didn't really pursue building the product first to go out and get this business started. You started solving the problem in a way that was sort of primitive to start with, and you got a validation that this is something that people want, right?
Yeah, and I would two experiences that I can say form the way I do what I do today. One is having that experience at TI to learn what I needed to learn before I could go start a business. And the second one is know your business before you start your business. I mean, you've got to learn it, and you've got to learn it at the street level. There's a lot of people who sit in an office and try to build something until you get you have to get down and talk to the customers, go to trade shows, get on the street, use your own business process before you try to commit to something.
Yeah. And people tend to fall in love with their idea from their perspective. We all experience different things. And I see a lot that founders will experience some sort of inconvenience or pain, and they'll come up with what they think is a terrific solution for it, but it just doesn't match what other people are experiencing all the time, right? Or it's not to a degree where people are willing to pay.
Yeah, it's critically important.
Yeah. So y'all did your validation by buying a pickup truck and going and moving couches.
Yep.
Awesome.
It was a hot summer.
Yeah. So that was what? That was 2015?
That was 2015.
When you started that? Okay. And so where was sort of the light bulb moment where you sort of, your mind shifted from, oh, okay, we're out driving a truck doing this. We need to scale this by using technology. Like, when did that occur?
It was we were doing technology by text message and by yellow pad. So our data collection was yellow pad, and our technology for dispatch.
It was the CRM of the day.
Yeah, it was the technology was text and yellow pad.
Got it.
But it was working, and people loved it, and so we thought, okay, that's a consumer hit. So let's bring this thing to market. Let's find a way to build some technology. Bumped into a guy who said, "Hey, I've already built most of what you need here," and I'm like, okay. And they did some demos for us. It looked pretty good. There was a front end, a back end, and some. There were no apps at that point, so we had to just build some apps on the front of this back end. And turns out that we didn't do much diligence on that guy. Another lesson learned. That guy ended up being a felon who stole money from startups. So technology took a big hit at that time because we had to go recode it. We had to start from scratch.
Got it.
Because
so y'all's initial
were suspect.
Got it. And so y'all's initial approach was not necessarily building from scratch, but you came across somebody who had built a platform that you thought could probably be repurposed for what you guys were trying to do. Saw a demo and thought, hey, this fits really good. We can just extend this, right, and get to market. So how, at what point did you realize something seems off? Like maybe this product isn't going to get us there?
Well, so when we said, okay, we're going to get the apps in the store by April 1st. That was 2015. And they said, oh, no problem. We can do that. The tech team, they had a team that was ready to go. And so we started working on it. We started working on use cases. We started working on the product. And April 1st came and went, and it was crickets. Like, where's our apps? And so that ensued. So the next 60 days was still, well, where are our apps? And there was lots of questions and not a lot of answers. And I said, okay, June the 1st, we are putting something in the App Store. I don't care what it is. Let's just get going. And sometimes you do have to do forcing for people, because a lot of times developers want to make it just right, or they want to solve every problem before you go to market. And I thought that's what we were dealing with. And so I said, it's good enough. There is a good enough aspect to it. And so we took it to market, and thought consumers would start downloading it and using it. And in Dallas, that was pretty easy because we were making some word of mouth. I got a pretty decent PR campaign working. My friend was doing PR for us, and we were getting a lot of noise because it was kind of a fun and interesting project. Yeah.
And so then, and I'm gonna detour a little bit, because I think the whole process of you really defining and pursuing your vision for Pickup kind of changed over time, right? I think at one point you thought it was going to be, straight, B2C, and then you kind of discovered it's something else, right? Through getting out there and talking to customers. Can you talk a little bit about, like, what was that journey like of really sort of making adjustments along the way to figure out what model would actually work?
Yeah, we were having some success. And, at the end of the day, we ended up with 24 consecutive quarters of revenue growth. That's really hard to do. Yeah. And along the way, we were like, okay, it's time to do a Series A so we can start getting outside of Texas. So by that time, we were in Houston and Austin and Dallas and looking at Florida. And so as we looked at how do we scale, and looking at the Series A, the markers for Series A, like everybody was asking, what's CAC and LTV look like? And I'm like, what's CAC and LTV? Right. So I got a big lesson there. CAC is customer acquisition cost, and LTV is lifetime value. That's what everybody was using to measure tools. And so we did some math around that and found that we were spending $45 to acquire one customer. Like, that's not scalable. So we sat down as a team with our biggest investor, and he's like, okay, guys, we got to go find some aggregation of customers. We're like, yeah, let's go. And we had been working with some retail stores, and that was landing. And the other thing that gave us was demand density, which the metro's big, just like Houston is big and Atlanta is big. So one of the big challenges that we had was just the sprawl. And so if you can aggregate your demand in certain points, then it makes it easier for your drivers to get repeat work. So
got it. Because the part of the challenge of a sort of a marketplace product is you got to bring together buyers and providers kind of in the same place relatively at the same time, and that's not easy, and so you were able to solve two problems. It sounds like you're able to find a high concentration of customers, so that brought your cost of customer acquisition down, right? And then you were able to concentrate your driver or your supply around the same area too. So you kind of solved two problems, it sounds like.
We did. And so we started going after every retailer that had big and bulky product that we could find. And we got national contracts with them and said, okay, we're going to start you in Texas, then we'll move to Florida, and then we'll scale from there. And so by the time we finished, I think we had 35 or 40 contracts, national, and the big ones, like with the Williams-Sonoma Group. These are great brands. And that when we started looking at Series A, Series B, these were attractive things for people. So what people are looking for in terms of value and investability in a business is, they dig in on your contracts. Are these 1-year contracts or are they 3-year contracts? How sticky are they? And do you get real recurring revenue? We didn't. It looked like recurring revenue, but it wasn't structured like recurring revenue.
Right.
So
it was more of a steady flow of revenue versus
B2B
like
to
recurring
C,
revenue.
But super unpredictable because it was swinging still on consumer demand.
Got it. So okay, and so we've talked a little bit about sort of how you got started with the initial concept, right? How you started off building a product, and then you guys made an adjustment on sort of your go-to-market strategy. Could we back up and then overlay, because you were raising money this whole time too. You were kind of doing the road show, and you're here in Dallas also. So, like, talk about that a little bit. What was that experience like? How was it raising money, and how much of your time went to that? What were sort of the things you had to work through there?
That was a full-time job for me, and I thought when we started, look, it's a pickup truck business. We should be able to fund this in Texas.
Yeah.
By the end of the day, we had done 7 rounds over 8 years.
Okay.
Raised something around $40 total million. And guess how much of that came from Texas?
How much?
Like $1 million. Thanks,
Wow.
Project. But all the rest, I was in Erie, Pennsylvania. I was in South Florida. I went to New York. I went everywhere to go raise capital. And I found it. And I was just so committed to the idea, it was all about the guys. For me, it was about creating a living wage opportunity for some of the best people in the world. And I was so committed to that, it didn't matter. I was pretty sick for a while there, too. I got pretty sick. I had a blood disease that I didn't know. And I'm like, tired. But I was determined. And so I kept that thing alive out of sheer will. And particularly after the first CTO ended up, like, literally getting convicted of a felony. And it's lots of hardship along the way. This should have been easy, and it's just hard. Everything seemed to be harder than it needed to be.
So you're saying this was an overnight success then?
Yeah. Huh? Super good.
It sounds like you got told no a whole lot, and you encountered a whole lot of obstacles before it started to work out for you.
Yeah, and then I said, hey, here's another good idea. Let's scale this thing nationwide. And, when they say you shouldn't scale something unscalable, well, we did.
That's a good saying. I work with a coach that he'll pretty frequently say that, that if it doesn't work at one unit, it doesn't work at scale, right? And I think that, parallels a lot with, what I think is really smart that you guys did with Pickup, which is you focus on validating it, in one increment. Right now, of course, you guys adjusted and evolved, beyond sort of what you initially thought it was going to be. But, so I'm sure you got told no by a lot of investors. You were all over the country trying to raise money. Was there sort of an inflection point where something happened with the business, or you figured out a way to present, what you guys were doing in a way where you felt like just traction took off, or was it just a tough sledding and just being persistent? It was tough sledding
the whole way. And then COVID hit, and then supply chain problems hit, and then COVID 2.0, and then supply chain 2.0. It was really, it was an 8-year run, but it was really hard.
Yeah. So if we think about, sort of your journey and as it relates to building the software platform, right? So you guys started off with what you thought was going to be a partner that was going to bring probably a lot of IP and get you ahead, right? That didn't work out. So it sounded like you guys ended up rewriting your platform. Well, how did you approach that? Because I think this is a question that a lot of founders try to figure out, and they make a lot of mistakes in the process about, I want to build this. I know what I want to build. And so, they approach it lots of different ways. Some of them will go grab a freelancer and start just working with somebody individually. Some will work with, a studio, or, maybe they got experience building software products. So they'll go ahead and start hiring an in-house team. Can you talk a little about when you guys were faced with that, we're going to have to start over, we're going to rebuild this. Can you talk us through that? Like how did you approach that?
Yeah, so we already knew we had a working business. So we had the opportunity, and a lot of people do when you're just trying to get to market, like funding rounds tend to also create opportunities for improvement of technology. So
right.
At least that's the way it used to be. And the one I'm building right now, that's not the case. But in those days, it was tolerable to say, well, we just have an MVP. We need to scrap all that and rebuild it. If you remember, Uber's first app was PHP, and it was dying just in San Francisco alone because it couldn't handle the capacity. So they had to stop and do a rewrite, and it hurt their revenue for a while. So we just said, hey, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go hard for creating something new. And so we were writing it on the fly. So while we're flying the plane, we're repairing the wings.
Yeah, and sometimes you kind of have to do that. I think there's this like sort of delicate dance between having enough clarity and enough planning where you really reduce the risk a whole lot, and kind of where you're going in more of a straight line, versus extreme planning where you need to know every detail, and you can go too far also, right? And I think more often I see people don't have enough clarity. They don't get enough of that done, and they sort of dive in and they just start writing something, and then kind of the example you use, they pick the wrong technology, or they build the wrong features, or they don't get enough clarity around what do we actually need to build in order to kind of advance our business plan. So thinking in those sort of steps. And so so you guys did that, and then over time, did you built your own in-house team, right? Didn't you started hiring people, and then you eventually like built that all in-house. Can you take us through, like, how did you decide to build a team? What order did you hire different types of folks? And, like, is there any learnings from, I would have hired this person first or this person later on, or like, what was that process like?
Well, it wasn't optimal. We never get to work in an optimal scenario, but because the way we raised money was just enough to stay alive at each stage of the business. And so we had, I think it was a team of 2.5 that rebuilt all of that technology. And so we had to cut some corners there. We weren't very smart about our data structure. So at the end of the day, we needed some stuff out of our data we couldn't get. So
got it.
I would encourage people to spend the time architecting properly and make sure that your future needs are met along with your current needs. But we just basically, every time we got some money, we added some more to technology. And then when things were getting pretty strong, we got to Series B guys, they say, look, you need qualified CTO. So we went out, found one. And he started putting, proper order to things, got our SOC 2 in place. So it just, over time, you mature, and your team matures along with you, and your leadership has to grow along with it, which is one of the hard things you have to do as a startup founder. Is sometimes your talent that starts with you isn't the talent that can finish with you. And and we all have trouble with that. But that is exactly what we had to go through.
Yeah, because you have to work within the constraints that you have, right? Like budget, and like you said, you're raising enough money to get to the next step, and then, what I found a lot of times, the roles start to splinter, right? You start to need more specialist and less generalist things. Yeah, and architecture, I think, is a prime suspect of where people get hurt, because what would be ideal is to have a specialist that really knows that stuff. That's what they do. They can really set out the right course. But what happens more frequently is you get a really strong developer that's sort of wearing the architect hat. Yep. And they may be a great resource, but they're getting a little bit beyond their experience and knowledge, and then you end up having to backtrack later. And so I think one thing that I think is different today than maybe even when you were starting Pickup, is the ability to get access to that kind of talent on a really fractional or as needed basis because of, like some companies will do fractional kind of resourcing, but also things like Upwork and freelance, that you can find a specialist for something. And I don't know if you would agree with this, I'd love your thought, but I would really encourage people, especially early on, that investing a little bit in some help on the architecture review, or at least like having somebody work through that a little bit with you. And also the other one is sort of the UX piece of it, like really making sure that you start off on the right path with your design system and everything. Those can save you a lot of effort and expense later on if you can just nail those down a little bit better in the beginning.
The ecosystem exists now to support that. It didn't used to, but there are 3 places I would not cut corners. And on the startup I have right now, we're doing all things. I think we're doing things the right way. I wouldn't cut corners on legal because I just shouldn't. I would lump legal and accounting together because you need to have a solid foundation as you get started. I would not cut corners on architecture because it matters. It really matters. Scalability matters. And if somebody hasn't thought through that properly, you're either going to be operating in a very expensive way or you're not going to be able to scale it. And then the third one is product. And I might even put product as number 1, is building what's needed for the customer problem is the most important thing to consider. The architecture and the construction of the business around that is secondary. You almost want to start there. And I think in Pickup we started with wireframes. I remember we brought you wireframes, but that didn't really functionally decompose the problem properly. It was our idea of how it ought to work. We were product people. We were just people who had kind of figured out what we wanted to do. And in Bike Trail, where I am now, we started with product, and we've got super strong product now because of it.
I'm going to want to dig into that a lot. I'm glad to hear that because that's something that I talk about regularly, because I will get asked a lot about, hey, we think we need to hire somebody. And oddly enough, one of the first ones that people gravitate towards is I need to hire a CTO, right? This is early, right? And I see why. That's sort of where a lot of people's mind goes initially. But or I need to hire an architect. That's another one. And I think there's issues with hiring an architect that early. And you need architect help, but I don't know if a full-time employee is the right move necessarily. But product is the one that I tend to go to. And a couple of things that I like about hiring a product person or a product strategist or an experienced product manager really early is you do get that definition about what are we really building. And you get them interacting with customers, so you get more of that validation and understanding what really is going to solve the problem. You get better clarity for the developers to build off of because they can work with designers and they can really help get that baked out a lot more. The thing that a lot of people overlook that I think helps a lot too, especially if you have a pretty big sales function to getting your product to market. Product managers are terrific with helping the sales team. Like participating in sales calls.
Yeah, they're your strongest salespeople, believe it or not.
They are because they can straddle that. They usually are pretty good communicators, the really good ones. And so they can talk with the client and they can also talk to the development team. They can bridge that gap, right? And then they can go back and forth pretty quickly to help, get alignment. And so it's good to hear you say that because that's something that I've seen that I definitely agree with. And so, so before we move into talking about your newest venture, because I think I want to spend some time talking about that. It sounds really exciting. If you look back at Pickup and we think, kind of specifically around, building your product and taking that to market, like what would you do differently product development wise? Like if you got to start over again, rewind the tape and just do it the way, what would be one of the biggest things that you would do differently if you had it over to do again?
I think, just like you said, I think we would have brought architecture to the forefront. And we would have done a better job of kind of deciding it's like, what does Jeff Bezos say? Write with the end in mind, write your headline. We didn't do that. And we built iteratively, but you still have to have a master plan in your mind. So there needs to be a North Star. And I would hire people that could help, whether it's fractional or full-time. But let's make sure that we have a North Star before we start building.
Yeah, that role has to be covered one way or another, right?
And product person keeps you pretty true to that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good insight. Terrific. So now let's fast forward. So you had a successful exit pickup. Congratulations on that. No, that was a long road, and you did a terrific job there. So you exited pickup, and then at what point did you decide, I want to do something else? I want to start something else. Tell us about that.
I was pretty burnt out at the end of that, right? That's operational businesses are hard. I probably won't pick another one of those. And I'm going back now to kind of like my first startup, which is heavy on the engineering, heavy on technology, and then kind of serving a really difficult need. So building a hard platform and product is where we started. And so
when you say hard, you mean like a hardware-based product?
No,
or
it's
like,
all
what do you mean by
software,
that?
but it's heavy lift. It's cloud. It's an edge. It's protocol. It's bare metal devices. It's
Got it.
It's secure cyber security. It's solving a multi-domain faceted problem. And,
Right.
And that's what's really interesting, and working with really smart people trying to solve that problem.
Got it. So the big distinction between this and maybe what you did at Pickup is that it had software, but there was a big, heavy operational component in people and hiring and scheduling and coordination and all that kind of stuff on top of having software.
We were driving mattresses around freeways in open bed pickup trucks. I mean, stuff happens, right?
Yeah. I would imagine, right?
Yeah, the operations center for that was never a dull moment.
Funny. And so with your new venture, you're really relying more on the software to be sort of the solution. So you got a lot of scalability and being able to expand the business that way, right?
And it's enterprise. I mean, so you really have to pay attention to architecture. If you're going to architect for enterprise clients, you really have to be thoughtful about the data, the security, the scalability. Where does it run? How much does it cost? What's it going to take to support it?
Terrific. Yeah. And can you talk about how you're approaching product development this time around? Because you've done it a couple of times. We've talked about some of the good lessons learned. Have you already sort of approached that stuff like with this? Are you starting out of the gate, like building, like an internal team, or like because I think this is the big question a lot of founders. They're like, what's the right way to start, and at what point do I start to morph my approach?
Okay, well, I'm going to say every business is different. They're all the same, but they're all very different. And so the way you go about each of them is going to be different. Some of them you might want an MVP. In this one, we understood the problem pretty well. I have two co-founders. So I would highly recommend co-founders that you know and that you can trust. Like, this is where, risk number one in startup is running out of capital. Risk number two, or they're interchangeable, is bad partner. Or wrong partner, not bad. People aren't bad. People are just wrong. And so getting those two things correct out of the gate here was what we focused on the most. And we knew that this one, just like I knew that Pickup was going to be a nationally scaled business, I knew that this one is going to have success. So we started building foundational architecture because there's so many moving parts to this platform. It's not really a platform.
Really complex, probably.
It's a compute system. So let's be thoughtful about how we deploy it. And we spent 18 months basically of our own time, our own money, and bootstrapping this to get it built to where it is.
Got it. And so you have two co-founders. How did you, what made you feel good about, like, this is the right founding team? What did you look for? What sort of complementary skills? Like, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's a three-legged stool. Like, I do all the business stuff. Steve does all the product, and Brandon does all the technology. And they live in kind of separate domains, but they cross over. And nobody's really comfortable in the other domains. So there is a clear separation of responsibility. There's also decades of experience working together. So this team, we know each other. Steve and I have built a couple brands together. Brandon and Steve worked together in cyber at Dell and at Credit for years. So we're in the finish your sentence kind of category at this point. So that risk
a lot of trust, probably.
Yeah.
And
if something's going wrong, we're very plain talk. That's my brother, and I'm going to tell him what I think.
Yeah, good. And sometimes there can be some heated conversations along the path, right?
I can't imagine trying to do this with somebody you're married to or somebody you didn't know or didn't have trust with.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because if you think about, so I've talked a little bit in the past about sort of what we call like the essential trio, which is sort of the visionary, right? More of a product, like product/UX like person and then the technical piece. Sounds like that's exactly the trio that you guys have assembled there almost.
Yeah, and
Good. Yeah.
centered around a really consequential problem. I mean, we have done our homework on talking to potential partners, customers, users, people that are building hardware in the space. We're building update capability for IoT devices. Boring, unsexy middleware that probably no one will ever see, but it's going to be magic when it's done.
And it's big, right?
It's
It's sort of a big, complex problem.
Yeah.
You know, the sometimes some of the best opportunities with software products is the really sort of big, hairy problems that are complex.
People think they're not solvable. If you live with a problem for a dozen years, that's why if you can come in orthogonally to a market like that and you look at it with different eyes and say, why can't we do that? Why can't we do this? And I even find that a lot of VCs are supposed to be visionary and venture focused. Look at these big problems sometimes and say, yeah, I don't think that's not gonna work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
because sometimes it's too big,
it
right?
Is too big.
And you know, and there's a different expectation, I think, about what it's going to take to launch a product when you are tackling something that's very big, complex, especially enterprise, versus something that's a little more simple, a little bit more focused, maybe consumer. There's also comes with it this different expectation of what the sort of return or the payoff can be on it, right? But it's a way different investment to build a really big, complex enterprise product than it is, you know, a small consumer mobile app, for instance.
No, I've been building this stuff for 4 decades now, believe it or not, 94, 04, 14, 24. And so it's funny that nobody asks anymore. Remember, even 10 years ago, what's your tech stack, right? That was the first question you get. Now, I think tech is assumed. So it kind of hurt us in this case because what we're building right now is so complex. It is not a simple thing that pull some libraries together and put a user interface on the front. It's not anything like that. In fact, we didn't even build UI until about 2 or 3 months ago. So the perception that tech is suddenly free and available is kind of a misnomer. I mean, it is, like I said, all these are different. We could have come in and built an MVP that was just a jokey little pretend thing, but we had to build foundational capacity first. So this one is just different. They're all different. Like if you're building a marketplace, you could probably build an app that has hamsters running in the background to make it work. Yeah.
We've actually done something like that before. I've seen where a client's, well, I've seen, you know, we had a client that was building like basically a marketplace app. It was like sort of, it was a rental type of solution. And the way that they initially approached it is they built basically a website that simulated the experience of placing this order and renting something, and they had humans in the background fielding that and working that order manually, matching it, and that's how they got the validation. They got started.
There's not a thing wrong with that. If you do that without capital, you might not code in some predetermined thing that was wrong.
Yep. Exactly. And if you can prove that, that changes the conversation with investors, I think, right? If you can show some amount of validation and traction, and just because your vision might be that it's really based on software does not mean that you have to necessarily start there, as proven by several things that you've done, and Pickup being the best case of that we've talked about so far. So, so are you raising capital now, or where are you guys sort of at in the process?
Yeah, so I'm just in the process of closing everything's changed now. Pre-seed and seed, and there's a lot. We raised some early capital for Oxygen. We're just getting ready to close that round, and then as soon as that round is done, we're looking for fuel so that we can staff out the rest of our team. I got 6.5 people over here right now. We will raise some seed capital, and it looks like things are improving, thank goodness. And that
you mean the market in general?
Yeah,
like
I think
just
so.
investment market?
2023 was hard. I just told the guys, put your heads down. Let's bootstrap this as far as we can go. It was, until it's so uncomfortable. But taking other people's money is a huge burden on you, right? Once you
a lot of pressure.
A dollar from somebody else, and now we've got some angels with dollars in here. It's a spread. Like our job now is velocity. Our job before was thoughtful architecture. Now our job is velocity. Because the minute you start diluting your stakeholders with additional capital, the race is on.
Yeah. What advice would you give founders that are sort of preparing or they're near that stage where they're about to start talking to investors about investing in their software company, what advice comes to mind? What would you tell them?
Gosh, there's so many resources out there right now that are free. And so we're a member of Capital Factory. That is one way to boot yourself up. In Texas, there's a company called Founders Suite, which is a CRM for investors, and they have databases and tools and techniques. Your legal teams, the bigger ones, have templates for everything. I mean, Y Combinator publishes stuff. So I would say go find a resource that you like, or a person who's experienced and been through it before. See what tools they used. I take these calls all the time, and I try to help people with, well, what is it? Do you really need money right now, or do you need something else? And it might be something else.
I think you give back a lot to the community. I would really compliment you a lot. That I see you around a lot. You participate in a lot of things. I've seen you on panels. You know, that's always been something that I've seen about you, Brenda, that you seem very willing to share knowledge and have conversations and sort of help other entrepreneurs. And so I can say that, you know, just from a perspective kind of from afar, that I see that you seem to be really willing to do that, and you spend a lot of your time, it seems, helping others kind of on that same journey and
I do. And
learning
I see
things.
you do the same thing, but it's important because this is how we're creating jobs. This is how we're going to solve big problems. I mean, some of these AI companies are giant ones, but people who are taking the application of that AI to next levels are small teams. Right? This is where job creation, innovation, and saving the middle class comes from. So that's, I care a lot. And, you know, just innovation in itself is fun.
It is. And, you know, I think that if we think about, you know, there's never been a better time, you know, to be able to pursue some sort of a startup or some sort of a venture. Like you said, there's a lot of free tools. There's a lot of resources available that weren't there, you know, 15, 20 years ago. And just access to information, being able to learn, figure out things. You know, we didn't have that stuff, you know, not too long ago. So I think, you know, but it doesn't replace hard work and being able to kind of get kicked down a bunch of times and keep moving forward.
It's hard and lonely. That's why we have to encourage people, because it is a very difficult job. And, you know, in the dark hours when COVID was there and we lost 70% of our customers at pickup, that's, you know, you've got to find grit somewhere.
Yeah, and you got to do it really quick, right? You got to move quick, and yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, we can start wrapping up, but I think with your new venture, you know, what's sort of, you know, when you're going out and you're talking to investors, what do you think is most unique about the opportunity of getting involved with you guys? I think the scale of it you talked about, sounds like y'all have got a pretty solid start on the platform already, but can you kind of summarize, like, what's the big things that you think would make investors really interested in what you guys are up to?
Yeah, it's funny. We were having a conversation this morning about moat, right? And angel investors and early stage investors will all ask you about moat. Like, what's your moat? And, and don't say it's your technology. Don't say it's your time that you're ahead. Don't say that it's speed. Give me something real. And so we sat down and came up with a half dozen things that are, you know, our team is something that is moat. The regulatory that is coming that we are uniquely able to address is moat. Things that are tangible. We have 6 areas of IP that could be considered moat. So they're, you know, working on those things. That's the conversation I'm trying to have. Is here's why us. Here's why now. Here's why this big problem can be solved. And I got to tell you, it took me 6-8 months. I'm still recrafting the pitch every week.
Got it.
Because it's a hard problem. And so depending on the audience you're talking to, I mean, my biggest investor so far is an insurance guy. And you know how I sold it to him? I said, you know how every month you get checks from people and it's called recurring revenue? And obviously he's done very well for himself. I said, this is just like insurance. It's recurring revenue. And he's like, I get it. So that was the easiest sale. But he doesn't know anything about digital twins or digital triplets or AI application. He just said, hey, I like this team, I like this problem, and I think you can do it.
Awesome. Well, I know you're going to do well with this, and I'm rooting for you, and just excited to see what you guys do. Thanks for like joining me today and talking through this. I think we covered some really valuable stuff
I hope
here
so.
that hopefully other founders can take something from. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yes, I'm happy to have done it.
Awesome. Thanks, Brenda.